A few months ago, Simagic announced the GT Neo, a feature-rich formula-style steering wheel at a budget-friendly price of under $300, and it had me curious, how good could this $300 wheel actually be? So I bought one to find out. And here it is, the GT Neo, and I've got to say, it's a very good-looking wheel, so let's dive into everything this wheel has to offer. On paper, this wheel has everything you could ever want from a formula style wheel. It has 10 RGB backlit buttons and 4 rotary encoders with their own LED rings, giving you a ton of customization options. There are also 15 LEDs across the top of this wheel, giving you the option to show shift lights, flag indicators, car indicators, and a slew of other information. There are also more premium features like 2 thumb encoders, 2 7-way funky switches, magnetic shifters, and dual clutches, so a lot is packed into this very budget-friendly offering from Simagic. Out of the box, the wheel is only going to be compatible with Simagic wheelbases, but for an additional $20, you can buy the Maglink kit, which allows you to mount whichever quick release system you already use up to the back of this wheel, and it also adds a magnetic USB connection, which is something we haven't seen on anything other than Cube Control's wheels at a much higher price. The Maglink installation process is pretty straightforward. There are 4 screws on the back of the wheel that you remove, and there are 2 internal connections that you need to unplug. When you unplug those, just be careful not to damage the connections on the wheel or with those cables. Once you mount up your quick release of choice to the new Maglink plate, you need to connect the USB connection back within the wheel to that plate, and then tighten those 4 screws back down, and you are ready to go. The quality you're getting from everything included in the Maglink kit is quite impressive, from the cable to the back plate, but they've also included some nice things like a USB extension cable that you can mount anywhere to your rig, and they've included the hardware to mount that extension cable to your rig, making it very convenient for you to have a USB port available for the wheel connection. So overall, Simagic has made sure that whether or not you are in their ecosystem or another ecosystem, you still have a very budget-friendly option for a formula-style wheel here. To customize the functions and lights on this wheel, you'll want to download 2 pieces of software. The first one is the Sim Pro Manager software, which is available from Simagic's website. This will allow you to make adjustments to the clutches of the wheel. It will allow you to customize some of the button colors from a predetermined set of colors, and it will allow you to make some customizations to the shift lights. It's also where you're going to get firmware updates for this wheel, so it's probably the place you want to go first when you plug this wheel up to your PC. The other way that you can customize this wheel in a much more fine-tuned way is through the SimHub software, which is a free software for a wide variety of sim racing related devices. You can add this wheel as a device via the SimHub software, and from there you have way more fine-tuned control over the colors of the buttons and the functions of all the LED lights on this wheel. You can add things like spotter notifications, flag notifications, animations for car startup, and a whole bunch of other things. In fact, out of the box, the profile for this wheel, when you add it to SimHub, already has some of those things configured. Now, if you want to get into the details on things you can do within SimHub to add customizations to your wheel, I suggest you find a tutorial related specifically to SimHub, because it is very powerful, and I am a novice at SimHub customization. That said, even if you use SimHub, you will still want the Sim Pro Manager software, because it's the only way you can make adjustments to things like the clutches, which you will want to do if you are in dual clutch mode. I'm impressed by all of the hardware that they've used on this wheel, because it feels of a higher quality than you'd expect on a $300 wheel. The buttons have a nice resistance to them when clicking them, and they have a nice positive click that affirms that you have actually pressed the button. You're also not going to get accidental presses because the buttons aren't mushy. They have a nice tactile feel. They've also designed the button guards in a way that makes it very easy to identify which button your finger is on before pressing it, meaning that you're always going to be able to find the correct button while racing without having to look down at the wheel. One thing I actually like about these buttons that I haven't seen on other wheels is there is a slight indentation in the middle of the button, so if you do add button labels to the wheel, the labels don't sit above the surface of the button, so they don't get peeled off over time. I'm also impressed by the encoders that they've used on this wheel. They have a nice resistance, so it's easy to accurately make adjustments from those encoders. On top of that, the thumb encoders also have a nice resistance, so it's once again easy to use those to make adjustments on the fly. And I think thumb encoders are pretty hard to get right. These thumb encoders feel better than some of the thumb encoders I've used on more premium wheels, and Simagic have thought about one of the drawbacks of thumb encoders, which is that your thumb can accidentally knock into those encoders, causing accidental adjustments. So they've built in these little thumb guards within the grips to prevent that from happening. I gotta say, that's a really nice touch. Now, one place they have cut costs a little bit are with the materials for the encoder knobs, which are made of plastic. And on the surface, this isn't necessarily an issue, but I have had an experience with encoder knobs that are made of plastic cracking in the past. And as far as I can tell, these encoder knobs are not removable. If I pull up on them, they don't budge, and there's no set screw to loosen them. So if there are issues with these caps cracking in the future, I'm not sure how you can replace them. The other gripe I do have that is a cost-cutting measure is that the encoder knobs do not have push buttons integrated with them. And that's something I have a big complaint about when it comes to a way more expensive wheel like, say, the F Pro from Cube Controls. But on a more budget wheel like $300, it's definitely something I can look past. One complaint I do have with ergonomics of the controls are with the funky switches, and it's a minor complaint, but because the funky switches are further inside the wheel than the buttons beside them, they're a little bit hard to reach without having to take your hand slightly off the wheel, making adjustments just a little bit more difficult. It's not a huge concern, and you can keep your hand sort of on the wheel still, but I would have liked to seen those funky switches in the place of the buttons beside them, and those buttons either swapped positions or moved further down the wheel for better accessibility. One thing I find really nice that Simagic has done is with the shifter lights across the top of the wheel. They're angled slightly upwards, so they're always pointed towards your face while driving, meaning they're very easy to see in your peripheral vision, so you never have to look down at the wheel to reference what's going on with those lights. The paddle module on the wheel containing the shifters and clutches is of full metal construction. The shifters themselves are magnetic, giving them a nice snappy feel, and Simagic has gone the extra mile with these shifters, adding a little rubber bumper in between the metal pieces, making sure that the shifters stay quiet as you pull and release them. The clutches are a nice touch on this wheel as well. Dual clutches aren't something you normally get on a wheel at this price point, and the dual clutches themselves are pretty well done with a few minor exceptions. The clutches can also act independently, so you can use them as normal clutches as well as dual clutch mode, but they can also be used for hand controls for things like throttle and brake if you need hand controls. Additionally, in the software, you can configure them to just be normal buttons as well. The first minor complaint I have about the clutches are that the springs they've used are a little bit too firm. The firmer springs used on the clutches make it harder to smoothly release the clutches when you are launching a car with a dual clutch. If the springs are a little bit lighter, there's less resistance from the springs, making it easier to control that release more smoothly. And here's an example of how it can be difficult to launch a car because of the springs that they use.
So it can be very easy to accidentally do something like this, where you release too quickly. So to get a nice smooth launch, you really just have to be super patient with the second release and really focus on it. 2 fingers on that clutch paddle instead of, say, 1 is going to be really helpful.
That said, it's a minor complaint and something you would get used to with this wheel. The second complaint I have around the clutches are with the dual clutch implementation in software. So let's go ahead and look at the Sim Manager Pro software to get into a little bit more detail about what the problem is. Okay, so we're in the Sim Pro Manager software now, and we're in this sync mode, which means if we pull in the right clutch, it will go to whatever our ratio has been set to with this slider. And if we pull in our left clutch, it will go to that same point. The only way to get it to go to 100% is by pulling in both clutches. To do a dual clutch launch in this mode, you would then release whichever clutch you want to, and then slowly release the next clutch after that to do your launch. The problem with this setup is neither of these clutches individually go to 100%. The only way to get those clutches to go to 100% on their own is by being out of sync mode, in which case each of them will go to 100%, but then you lose the ability to do a dual clutch launch. Normally, dual clutches are set up in a way that one of those clutches will always go to 100% and one of them will always go to the bite point that you set. And that allows you to always access 100% clutch from one of those clutches in case you need to do things like a clutch turn, donuts, which are obviously the most important of the situations, or launches in cars that don't require a dual clutch. If you're in any of those situations and you are in the synced mode or the dual clutch mode that Simagic has set up, you always have to pull in both of those clutches. Another one of these scenarios is fuel saving in iRacing. If you are clutching into a corner to maintain speed while you are fuel saving, you have to pull in both clutches. So that's a little bit of a downside. And this is an example of the confusion that the dual clutch configuration on this wheel can cause if you are used to the more traditional primary and secondary clutch configuration.
Is 19. The air temp is 18.
Oh,
Celsius.
no, we jump
Okay,
started
Jeff, be
because
ready.
the stupid
Watch
f***ing clutches.
Floor it. Green, green, green. Black flag. It's the pits to serve it.
No, see, I pulled in the one clutch thinking that it was going to be 100% and it wasn't 100%.
You've got a problem. Change your
clutches. The good news here is that they can fix all of this in software, and is what I'd like to see them do is just add a button here that allows you to set dual clutch mode, or a checkbox beside one of these clutches that allows you to set the bite point clutch, and then the slider would only apply to the clutch that you had selected for bite point. So that way you can always get to 100% by pulling in one clutch, and then, you know, the secondary clutch or the bite point clutch would always just go to your bite point. I hope they update this in the future to work more traditionally, because it can be confusing if you are used to a traditional setup of having a primary and secondary clutch. One material I'm really impressed by on this wheel is the body material, which Simagic says is a carbon composite material. And the thing that impresses me the most about this material is just how sturdy it is. It is fairly light. It feels like some sort of plastic and composite mix. It does look like forged carbon fiber, but it isn't carbon fiber. But with wheels that I've used in the past that use a similar construction to this with some sort of plasticky material, you'd get some creaking and groaning from the wheel as stress is going through it while you're driving. And that was not something that happened with this wheel at all, which was really surprising. I don't know if there's like a metal chassis within this, but it is super firm. There's no flex at all on this wheel. So all of the force feedback you're getting from your wheelbase is going into your hands and not getting lost in flexing or stressing within the wheel, which I find really impressive for a $300 wheel. The grips on the wheel are also quite nice. They're made of a stiff rubber material that seems to be wrapped around the carbon composite material of the rest of the body. They are fairly firm, but Simagic have also done a good job of making them ergonomic by carving out things like thumb slots and flaring out the back of those grips to make them very comfortable in your hand as you're gripping the wheel. I drove with them for about 4 hours and never ran into any issues with hand fatigue like I have on other wheels that may have smaller or less ergonomic grips. So overall, Simagic have done a good job here making the wheel feel very comfortable to drive with. One thing that also contributes to the comfort of the wheel is the 300mm diameter, which works well across a variety of cars. Overall, I've got to say, I'm really impressed by the GT Neo. It feels more premium than a $300 wheel, and that mainly comes down to them being clever with how they have used less expensive materials to make them feel more premium than they really are. One of the places they did this is by molding the grips to fit your hands very nicely. They've also used better materials in places that you interact with more, like the thumb encoders and the shifter modules, and the buttons on the wheel feel more premium than you would ever expect from a $300 wheel, which kind of plays into the customization options that up until this point we haven't seen available on a wheel at this price, with the inclusion of support within SimHub, which is also very impressive. Overall, I have to say, if you purchase this wheel, I think you're going to be quite satisfied with it, and overall, I think you're going to be impressed by the quality you're getting from the wheel given the price that you've paid for it.